Poetry that is on your webpage.
Yeah, some poetry that's on my webpage. Here's one that I like that I read fairly frequently at readings at open mics, and it's called Citing Elvis in Lexington, Virginia. We pulled off I-81 for ice cream and air conditioning. As we walked back to the car, Elvis was standing by a blue convertible outside a church up the street. How did I know him when we'd never met? Perhaps the careless posture as he leaned his famous hip against the door, young and patient, hair bright black in the Saturday afternoon heat. The car said, "Just married." Is he going to tell the groom he's nothing but a hound dog? I asked my husband. No, of course not. Love me tender, said the man who had insisted on a tiny and circumspect wedding. I looked back 3 times to check after we turned the corner. Elvis was still on the empty sidewalk, waiting for the journalists, the opening chorus of female shrieks, alone there in the shade. It's so hard when you're dead, and the party expects you to stand outside. Based on a true incident.
Really?
Yep, there was an Elvis impersonator outside this church in Lexington, Virginia.
You and Bill Van Buskirk should read your Elvis poems back to back.
Here's one that I like that is also on that little webpage. It's a 3-part poem, and it's called The Mark of Zero. It rhymes, after all, with sorrow. Just say it as if you're glad. Zip, zap! It's that antiseptic blade. It has cauterized the veins. No blood will pour now. All the wounds will simply throb in fun. I imagine you sitting there staring into polar screens of electrons. I see their glow on your face. I just can't imagine the face through the mask. Doctor, please check. It's a pain. I can't see. I'm sorry, miss. I'm afraid it's Z, the last variable. 3. What grows inside 0? That tiny womb. I don't know where that one came from. That was just, fun pieces.
Any plans to continue your webpage?
And I keep thinking that I should, because I have all these poems from 2007 and 2008 and so on and so on and so on, but I would just have to put them on the page. Interestingly, I have poems there that are from 1994, 5, 6, when I first came to Swarthmore, and the versions of those poems in Microsoft Word are no longer legible. Sort of legacy web pages, unless you really screwed up, are still legible, where legacy software, not so much. And 94, that's 25 years ago. I guess that's long enough that it kind of makes sense, but so I should sometime, maybe in my next leave. The beautiful thing about being a professor is that you get sabbatical leave. So, typically we like vacation really hard for a month and just sleep a lot starting leave, and then there's time to do. I'm working on 2 translations. One is my translation of some Serbian poetry, which I love and I'm really, really enjoying. And the poet herself is about my age, and she got an MA, a master's in comparative literature from Michigan State University. So her English is very good, even though it's been quite a while since she was in this country. I can ask her questions, and she's being really gracious and not saying, why did you choose this word? I know that this word means such and such. Occasionally people with a little bit of English will do, typically people with more English will not do that. But then I'm editing someone else's translations and mistook the deadline and discovered it was much earlier than I thought it was. So I'm sitting at home, typing, looking, typing, fixing, looking up, flipping dictionary pages. No, this is the wrong word, he misunderstood. Oh my God, he didn't even translate this 3-page block. So that's the problem. I mean, in fact, with an academic job, typically you're very free with your schedule. You have that 9 hours a week when you're in the classroom, but that doesn't count the time preparing, the time grading, the time doing all the other things, reading for the next class you're teaching, or fixing the syllabus, or changing the web page, or reading the comments that your students put on the blog, and commenting back, and all of that. So it's great, it's really good.
You have your chapbook there, and
It's not even a chapbook, it's got a little back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a short book. It's 59 pages, so it's probably book, but not by much.
But
Yeah.
talk about the book a little bit. How did that come about, and
Mhm.
how did you select the poems that went in? Talk about the cover,
Sure,
which is
a
interesting.
lovely cover. Well, this is a book that was put together by Matt Lake at Parnelis Media, which is clever because it's based in Media, Pennsylvania. Ha 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 ha. And,
That's right.
yes, I had put together a manuscript to submit for the Dogfish Head contest because the idea of getting 2 cases of beer just was really, really pleasing. I mean, what a great story, aside from the fact that Dogfish Head is lovely beer and, you know, what a great thing that they're supporting the poetry and all the great people who won that competition. But I didn't win, and Matt said, show me your manuscript, so I handed it over, and that was the last I heard of it. But then he put this together. Look at that lovely, lovely cover. And so it's a palmistry cover. Right, it has all of the different astrological signs and sort of old-fashioned writing on the hand telling you about the different things, that riches and poverty, death in prison, shameful death, and so on. And the first poem in here is the one that the title came from, Secondhand Fate. It's called Secondhand Fates. My friend is wary of secondhand clothes, says, who knows whose bad luck twisted into this one? It's just as bad as picking up money you find lying in the street. The higher the denomination, I guess, the bigger the sin someone was hoping to expiate. But I say no. The purchase cleanses clothing, anonymous cash that works for anyone. This skirt is as new as the day it left the machine of the underpaid 16-year-old who sewed its final seams, if you want to fret about whose fate you're pulling on. Or maybe I'm always dressing in someone else's destiny and speaking with someone else's words. I go about clad in scarecrows and have simply become too accustomed to the planets and cards and tea leaves and lines on both of my palms, or even, who knows, lines on the soles of my feet, although these shoes were new, to wonder what might be sinking in from all the signs and remnants of someone's life that I'm recycling.
Dressing in someone else's destiny. What a great line. Can I have that?
Please, it's the citational cicada. You'll be reading and you'll suddenly hear.
Oh, when we were off camera, we were talking about that you do palmistry, and so obviously that.
I don't actually do palmistry, although give me your hand for a sec. Let's see. All right, you're very smart. And you're
Sly already.
You're also fairly close to where you grew up. You haven't like departed
That's
terribly. That's about all I know from palmistry. Although there is a poem by Sofia Parnok, who was a very interesting, again, modernist Russian poet, where she describes walking down the street and seeing a woman coming the other way who looks as if she hasn't slept enough, her eyes are red, and it looks as if she's been biting her lip. So a little blood on her lip, and Parnok's speaker says to this person whom she doesn't address, in fact, I know without looking that on your hand you have the girdle of Venus, which I looked up, and it's a line that would connect these 2 fingers, and it would mean that you're a lesbian, right? So if you don't know girdle of Venus, like what on earth? But that is the description. So in fact, there are times when knowing a little bit about astrology or about palmistry can help, in fact, to elicit what's going on in a poem.
That's really interesting, though, that you're saying that it can get into your poetry. I'm assuming that was a very natural thing for you because of your interest. Do you have anything with you to give us an example?
Here's one. This one refers to the tarot cards, what they call the major arcana. Now, nobody who really worked with tarot cards would say major arcana unless they'd read a book about it. It's the sort of thing that specialists then kind of tell practitioners this is what's going on. But the poem is called Exiling the Emperor, and when I've read it, I will explain. The Emperor is card number 4. He follows the Empress, number 3, but there's no visible connection. That, of course, is the camouflage. He unfolds into the whole suit of swords. He's a fine figure of a man, there on his throne, mind honed like a fencing blade. He has much to teach about power, about clever taunts for one's enemies, and a touch. No, no! Look there at the desert where he perches, sterile cliffs behind him, at the bright ornaments on his armor, his absent gaze, his automatic plans for conquest and spoliation. He's master of a cake of sand, master of a crag of sandstone, never mixing earth and water, master of forcing unconnection for the sake of a better explosion when opposites at last collide. No, better yet, the emperor stands splendiloquent on his ice floe, his oily feathers preened perfectly amid an infinity of absolute cold. He would only turn his head towards someone of the same chill breed. There, save this spell to recite whenever you start to want him. The major arcana begins with the Fool, who is 0. Interesting that there's a 0 card in the tarot. And then number 1 is the Magician, number 2 is the High Priestess, usually. And then number 3 is the Empress, number 4 is the Emperor. So it's based on the way the tarot card looks.
There you go, Steve, you're the Emperor.
I'm the Emperor.
Ah, there you go. I said all these mean things.
But that's part of what is so fascinating about poetry. I mean, I don't know anything about tarot cards, and I would venture to say that most of us don't, but there's a way to go into another world through poetry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think poetry should draw on all of the possible systems of knowledge. And every time you pull that thread, something comes. So if I did know what kind of tree that was out the window, right, that would be an interesting thing to say. Or if I knew any kind of, well, I know some of the plants in my garden because they're in my garden, but what the hell is that thing growing? That type of thing. You know, any kind of knowledge, knowing about cookery, knowing about the joints in your hands, all of those things can open, again, I think, a door into a cupboard or into a room or out into a garden. But, then the poem is just much richer.
Do you have anything else that you particularly want to read?
I do. I have a poem by a wonderful Russian poet named Yulna Moritz, and I translated it, and I will not read you the Russian part because it's kind of long, but I wanted to read the English translation. And Moritz was born, I think, in 1937. She's the generation that came of age during what they call the thaw, when Khrushchev was the first secretary of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. And so she comes from a kind of, sort of dissident-ish atmosphere in that era, although I haven't kept up with what she's doing. I translated this a long time ago. So it's called Polonaise, which is a Polish dance. Right, and think of Chopin playing as the 3-beat thing as I read it, and it's dedicated to Alina Doroshevska. Madam Alina, ah, Madam Alina, cranes in a caravan sail a wedge, leaving, and the corncrakes are departing on foot. Morning's hard freeze is like salt when it glitters, hoarfrost of starch in the field of potatoes. Leaves, like the swans, went away with a rustle, and the corncrakes are departing on foot. Mama's acquaintance, a down-and-out vagrant, walked along, walked, and became a transparent dewdrop quite suddenly, and in the night joined a good family. But they forgot to snuff the child's memory, keep the door bolted, lock all the earlier lives away tight. Madam Alina, ah, Madam Alina, life is so short, but how long and how creeping, rains in the autumn, the dark and the slush, just as if we didn't have enough shadow back in the 3rd or 4th birth. Not a sad one? We're incombustible, deaf to all reason. In Warsaw's ashes, in Tuvim's font basin, a rose on the street grew embracing the cross. Now we are born, but we're not the first variants. Both have been each other's children and parents. That is the secret of strings that resound. Poets keep living through secret sensations. All of us will be born, sometimes in places, on the same ground. Universal relations, kingdom of love in a heaven without bound.
That's even harder, I think, than actually writing the
Writing
poem
your own
from scratch
poem.
because
Yeah, trying to get it.
Yeah.
you have. It sounds like it was written in English the way
Mhm.
you've
Oh,
translated.
good. I'll work on that one a long time.